I notice I only have 15 minutes. Wow, what a beautiful sight from this pulpit. To see over 600, almost 700 men of God sitting in here today is just absolutely incredible. What an honor for me to be here today to cook a little lunch for you and at the same time share a couple of words with you. One of my teachers used to say that the worst thing you could possibly put in the hands of a Cajun was a microphone and a high school diploma. So with that being said, I know why the 15 minutes are here. I'm going to read that menu to you in a little while, but for those of you who know me, you know that I was born and reared in the swamps of Louisiana, and I am so happy, so fortunate I could just kneel and pray at this moment that Father Champagne took the microphone before me, because with his accent, I know you probably think I graduated from Oxford. But what a great speaker! What a great speaker all have been today. I often ask myself about 3 o'clock in the morning, and I do wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning. I often ask myself about the day that in my own heart I feel that grace was given to me and that my door was knocked upon by God to say, get involved. And I think about that moment, and it changes constantly as to what that day was. But moments happen in my life that when I look back over them, I say that had to be it. As a young Cajun chef, my greatest dream was to bring the wonderful culture and cuisine of all of us to the world. That's what I wanted to do. That's all I cared about. I strived every day to work at the task of getting doors open globally to bring our rich culture and cuisine to the world. But my challenge was that I wanted to bring it to places that no one was able to open the doors of those countries. So it was China, it was Russia. And it was in Russia that the Soviets sent an envoy to my door in Donaldsonville, Louisiana, after 2 years of requests to open a restaurant on Soviet soil. And that courier had a ticket on Aeroflot Airlines out of New York to Moscow. To make a real long story short, I got to Moscow. They gave me the right to open a restaurant there. And when I got back home, I realized, after a call from Washington, that the Russians had given me the date of the Reagan-Gorbachev summit of 1988 to open my restaurant, because they had no food, they had no service, and they said, who is this crazy guy from Louisiana who's asking us to open a restaurant here? Get him on the phone, get him over here. We need food. They chose a Louisianian. They chose one of us to open that first restaurant in the Soviet Union. But it was at that moment, laying in my bed years later, as I'm so proud of my accomplishment, that God knocked on my door and reminded me that years before in Russia, my interpreter, a young woman, had grabbed my arm as I was leaving out of the Soviet Union on my first trip, and she whispered to me, "Chef, bring me a Bible." And I said, "Excuse me?" She says, "Bring me a Bible." but be careful. It is extremely dangerous for you. I didn't think much of it. I came home, made my preparation with the team to go to Russia, realizing the Soviet Union had demolished every church, all the great basilicas, including that gorgeous one right in the square, St. Basil's. And I thought about that for a moment, dismissed it, and then when getting ready to come back to Russia to open the restaurant, I was packing my clothes, and there was a Bible. I took it, put it inside my case, went to Russia, and somewhere along the way, after the ribbon cuttings with all of the ceremony, I was able to see my interpreter again in some little black hallway where I was able to give her that Bible. Tears poured down her face. And I didn't quite realize at that time what had happened. She clutched it to her chest, put it under her little robe, and scurried out of the door. The next day she said, "Thank you, I have read the Word of God for the first time." Years later, at 3 o'clock in the morning, God wakes me up, and I know at that moment that I wasn't chosen to go to Russia or the Soviet Union to open some restaurant. But it never dawned on me that God chose a Cajun boy from the swamps of Louisiana to bring the Word of God to the Soviet Union and to this one woman. And that was the real gift that I've been given. I thought about that and really cried myself at the fact that I wasn't smart enough to know it. And my faith had been shaken but strengthened in a way because I knew at that moment that God was really talking to me. Oh, I had been an altar boy at St. James Catholic Church. Oh, you know, I thought I was pretty responsible in my faith. I went to church every Sunday, almost. I went to confession once a year, almost. But for me, it was more about me. And then God woke me up one morning at 3 o'clock, many years later, and reminded me of my youth. Many of you know my story, but I only now know my story because I know why that story was told. My father was a trapper. Many guys in the audience from Pierreport, you know what I'm talking about. My daddy was a trapper. He spoke French. My mother was one of 6. She spoke French. My dad made his living on furs. And my mother took care of the 8 children that lived, and she mourned the 2 that died. My dad just loved his trapping, his crawfishing. He loved outdoors. In May of 1955, my mother, on her 9th month with her 10th child, died in childbirth. The child died as well. We were 8 children, the youngest, about 13 months, twins. The oldest, 11. Almost 12. I was 8. We didn't realize what had happened, but Mother was gone. Dad gathered us all together, tried to explain to us that Mother was gone. We had a funeral. The whole neighborhood showed up, and they couldn't believe, I'm sure, what Dad was going to do with these children, these 8 babies. A man of the woods. Well, after the funeral, the coffin was open in the graveyard. I've never seen that since. Each one of us was picked up to kiss her goodbye before the lid was closed. We got home. Daddy gathered us all around the bed, and he said, "We will stay together." In those days, as you know, children were broken up to go to godmothers and godfathers when you were young. To say we will stay together is huge. Even we knew what that meant. Well, God reminded me many years later that knock on the door 2 weeks later, when that African-American woman, Mary Fascio, who had 6 children of her own, was standing on the porch as Daddy opened the door, and we all looked out to see. And Mary Fascio, this beautiful African-American woman, says, "I'm here to help." Daddy said, "To help what?" She says, "To raise these children." He says, "Well, who are you?" She says, I'm Mary. About a month ago, I was walking down this lane, and your wife, Miss Therese, was hanging clothes. It was May. It was hot. She was 9 months pregnant. I sat her on the step. I got her a glass of water out of the cistern, wiped her face, and hung the clothes for these 8 children. Your wife grabbed my hand and said, "If anything ever happens to me, would you look in on these kids?" She looked in for 22 years. She raised her own 6 to success, and she raised the 8 of us. She taught us diversity. She taught us love. She taught us respect of our name by always saying, all you have is a name. If you mess it up, go fix it. She was there for breakfast. She was there for dinner. God made me realize that He's been sending me gifts all of my life. He's been knocking at the door to remind me of what those gifts were. Sometimes I heard, sometimes I didn't. But I know that I'm standing here today after bringing my Cajun culture, my Cajun cuisine, and yes, my Bibles to 12 countries of the world as I bring our wonderful lifestyle to people who don't very well know what Louisiana's all about. I don't know what He has in store for me for the rest of my life, but I think standing here talking to you and being able to do it might be an indication that somebody out here, or many of you out here today, as I look upon this sea of Catholics, that you all have a story to tell about the gift that God has given you. Every one of you have the same gifts He's given me. We need to reach down in our prayers to find Him. We need to hear Him knock on our door. And we need to respond to His calling. I'm so proud to be a Catholic. I'm so proud to have lived the life I've lived in tragedy, often, because I've come to understand that God has a way of putting tragedy in our lives to remind us that over that next little hill is the greatest gift He'll ever give us. We just need to get there. And that's the story that I wanted to share with you today. Not my story, but your story. And to look deep down in your heart within your community. Look deep down in your heart, first of all, and then into your community to see how you can get involved to tell the story of the goodness of God. Thank you all so much for listening to that. The menu. Thank you all.